Thank you so much, Mark. It's really a pleasure to be with you, and particularly as you named, to really sit into Shabbat together. So, our practice today is actually going to build off of the practice that those of you who were here last Friday did with Rabbi Dorothy Richmond, who is a beloved teacher of mine as well. And it's based on the work of someone named Dr. Rick Hansen, who's a very prominent psychologist and meditation teacher. And it's also really, I think, rooted in the period of time that we are in on the Jewish calendar, which is that we're on the second of the seven Shabbatot between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, where we are moving through this period of consolation. And as was mentioned last week, many of us have likely either started reading or will soon begin to start reading or rereading, as the case may be. This is real, and you are completely unprepared by Rabbi Alan Liu, Zichrono Livracha. May his memory be for a blessing. And it's this it's a now classic work of preparation for the high holidays. And part of that preparation is the 7 week period of consolation that we are journeying through together. And as we are doing so, I often think about this as the counterbalance, perhaps, to the 3 weeks of mourning that we went through and completed just over a week and a half ago now, where we are invited to find a sense of joy and pleasure and build back up, perhaps, maybe to use that metaphor. That metaphor may work for you, it may not, but to really come from that narrow place into a wider expanse. And this has felt both extremely important in my own spiritual life and also very difficult, which is why I think the practice is so important. Because when we are allowing ourselves to cultivate, we're going to be doing a cultivation practice today. When we are allowing ourselves to cultivate a sense of delight and pleasure, it can help us to recognize that the negative bias that we have in our brain, neurologically wired, we're wired to remember the things that are really tough and challenging, and we often dismiss or put away or put aside the things that are delightful and pleasurable. This is a way of really anchoring ourselves in the fullness of the experiences that we are having. It's not meant as an escapist tool, like we're not pretending that things aren't as they are or that we don't live in very challenging times, but instead, we are allowing ourselves to be with the fullness of our human experience. And I particularly feel that this practice can be very useful to those of us for whom despair feels much easier and more available than pleasure and delight. So I want to begin by inviting us to find our seat, to find a posture that is alert and awake and dignified. I want us to feel our feet on the ground, perhaps, our hands against our thighs, perhaps, if you're sitting in a chair, as I am, or if you're lying down, to notice the way in which the surface that you are lying upon is supporting your body, or if you're on a cushion, to notice the feel of the cushion, the fabric, the filling of the cushion, the weight of the cushion, the height of the cushion, just all of the physical aspects of it. And I want us to just pause and really let ourselves ground there for a moment. Once you're there, I invite you to take a very deep breath together through the nose and exhale fully through the mouth. Again, we'll take a deep breath in through the nose, and a full exhale through the mouth. And as we are breathing in this way, I invite you to notice if there is any joy or delight in this breathing, any pleasure to be found there. We'll take another breath in and a full exhale. As our anchor for our practice today, I invite you to turn your attention towards something that brings you pleasure, either in your external environment or bringing something to mind. So, some options for that I find supportive could be a pet, favorite pet, or a favorite place, or a person, or even a food, perhaps, but something that brings you pleasure. To just be with that when that place or person or pet comes to mind, we'll now do something called enriching that experience, where we are with that experience or that individual or animal, and just allowing ourselves to really feel into the depth of the delight we have when bringing that individual or animal or place or experience, whatever it is for you, to mind. If it's a dog, maybe you're imagining snuggles or the feel of the fur or the energetic playfulness and the joy that you get playing with the dog. Or if it's a place that you're bringing to mind, really just thinking about how you feel when you're there, the feelings of delight and pleasure that you experience when you're there. To just really deepen into all the aspects of that pleasurable, delightful experience. And I invite us for the next few minutes of our practice to really just keep bringing different things to mind. You could choose to really stay with the person or animal or whatever it is that you brought to mind. Really just allowing every part of your body and soul and cells and being to just melt and marinate in these feelings of pleasure and delight and all of the good feelings that are arising. You might also be experiencing some sense of resistance. Maybe it feels really, really hard to feel these feelings of pleasure and delight. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe it feels selfish or too much of a self centered practice. And that's here too, and that's okay. And so, as we sit together in silence for the next several minutes, I want to invite us to continue with this cultivation practice, staying with what we've brought to mind or repeating the exercise with something else, maybe another beloved person or experience or pet or place or food or whatever that is for you. So, we'll sit together now for about 8 or so minutes in silence. Really allowing yourself to marinate in the feelings that arise as you deepen and enrich your experience, the pleasure. continuing to notice what arises, including any resistance, which is totally welcome and it's part of the practice. Being with that too. You are invited to repeat this practice as many times as you wish, bringing to mind different things each time. The time that feels so complex, many different external and internal conditions arise and pass away that make it feel really hard to cultivate a sense of joy, delight, and pleasure. This practice has been very supportive in my own work to recall the depth of human experience moment by moment. And it reminds me that life is not all one thing or another. And we aren't seeking, again, with this practice to turn away. In fact, we are seeking precisely the opposite, to turn towards what is, and to do so by cultivating what is, which is that every day there are little moments of pleasure and delight that we habitually skip over. And as we know in our mindfulness practice and rooted in many wisdom traditions, that what our mind habituates to, that's what it gets strongest in. So, this is a means by which we can start to habituate our minds towards not only recalling pleasurable and joyful moments, but actually allowing ourselves, giving ourselves permission to marinate in joy and delight. Because that's part of what it is to be human. Many of us were conditioned away from that, and this is a way of really allowing ourselves that deep internal freedom. And particularly, it feels fitting to do this on a Friday as we're moving into Shabbat and we're moving into that native Jewish mindfulness practice that we have of Shabbat, of stopping, of cessation, of marinating in joy and delight from beginning to end. And as we gently begin to bring our practice to a close, I just want to invite you to do this multiple times a day. You could even take just a minute at a time and notice what arises, what shifts, perhaps, what transforms, perhaps, what's hard, what's challenging. All of that is important, and all of that is here, and all of that is welcome. So, as we turn it back over to Mark in just a moment, I want to thank you all for your practice, for your presence, and for your open heartedness. Thank you all.
Rabbi Lauren, thank you so much. Beautiful, really beautiful. Such a great practice to lead us on a Friday into Shabbat together. Be able to lift up the Ta'anuk Shabbat, the pleasure that Shabbat reminds us to be on the lookout for, to be mindful of. Let's seal it as we do each day with an opportunity for those of you who are in mourning to recite the Moorish Kaddish. For those of you who are not reciting Kaddish, it's an opportunity for you to be present for those who are. So we hope you'll stay with us for a few minutes. Those who are reciting Kaddish are invited to put the name or names of anyone you're honoring today in the chat now or after we recite Kaddish. If you are joining us in Kaddish, please rise in body or in spirit, and you can unmute yourself at this time. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbi, Yalma Divrach Yilute, V'yamlich Malchutei, V'chayechon, V'gamechon, V'chaye T'chol Beit Yisrael, V'agala V'zman Karev,
Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba
Rabba
Mevorach, Ya'olam
Yavam Yomei Amaya.
Yiparach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitramon, V'yitnaseh, Yitada, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shmei T'kudsha, V'yichus, V'eva, Mikol Birchata, V'shirata, Tushbechata, V'nechemata, V'amiran, V'alma, V'ibru, Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shlama Rabba Mishamaya, V'chaim Aleinu V'yal Kol Yisrael, V'ibru, Amen.
Amen.
Shalom Yimama, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'yal Kol Yisrael, V'yal Kol Yoshvei Tevel, V'imru, Amen.
Amen.
Friends, thanks so much for joining us today. And if you're leaving us now, I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. I'm putting in the chat again a link to Rabbi Lauren Tuchman's website, and particularly to the page that gives you some background about Lauren's amazing work in the Jewish world and in terms of disability inclusion, working with Musar, with Savara, and beautiful teaching in the Jewish community. And I really encourage you to subscribe to Rabbi Lauren's newsletter as well. Little plug there for your newsletter, Lauren. If you're leaving us now, I want to invite you to join us next week. We have a beautiful lineup of teachers starting Monday with Allison Cohen, a wonderful Jewish mindfulness teacher who'll be leading us. Tuesday, Cantor Kareth Spencer Shapiro. On Wednesday, Larry Yermak. On Thursday, David Gottlieb. And on Friday, next week from today, Zach Newman of Hamakom in the UK will lead us to sit into Shabbat. So join us next week if you're leaving us now. As always, you're invited to stay on for conversation, to go a little bit deeper into today's teaching and practice, or just connect with each other, share reflections on your experience with the practice today, or use the next 15 minutes or so as an opportunity to continue with your practice. You can turn the sound off on your device and make use of this space and this community to support you in your own practice to sit into Shabbat together. So, Laura, I'm going to bring you in here. Joy seems to be a theme. Now you need you to unmute, Lauren, if you can. And oh, hold on. There you go. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we're good. Okay.
Perfect.
So, Lauren, thank you so much. I was, first of all, I am among those who you mentioned who, for whom negativity bias and, cultural conditioning to look for reasons to despair and worry and have anxiety and fret. Uh, you know, no struggle there for me. Um, but it is can be challenging to look for, take in, appreciate pleasure, and where we are also in the, like as you pointed at where we are in the Jewish calendar and connect it with last week's beautiful teaching by Rabbi Dorothy Richmond. That this time, especially this month of this Menachem of this time of comfort, consolation, right, which we've been that here's where I want to go. The first to ask you this question is that it's a time of comfort and consolation, which in a sense is sounds it is positive, but it's not as positive as pleasure. It is like may the pain of griefs recede or stop, right? At least that's how I experience. That's how I understand it. Okay, so let's start with consolation. And there is some pleasure in the relief from the pain and suffering and the grief. That's, over. Tisha B'Av is over. We're moving on. We're in a different time now, different place. It's as if, we're in a different place in the mourning process. So, in terms of Shabbat, and here's where my question is, because I think it's really helpful to lift up about Shabbat that it's not just prohibitions, don't do this, don't do that, but there's actually the sense of this is a time for really accentuating pleasure, right? Wearing your best clothes, eating your best food, enjoying everything, enjoying life to the fullest. Is there something about the prohibitions around Shabbat, like refraining from something that you think is contributes to that pleasure, or what's the kind of pleasure that you're talking about here? Would you say?
Yeah. Well,
That's an
first, thank you.
inartfully put question, I thought.
No, I love it. But first of all, I have to join you, Mark, and say that there is no struggle for me in despair and anxiety. So that's
You're inspiration to us all, Lauren.
right. But it's again, it's the thing that you practice, right? You get strong in. And obviously, like many of us have struggled with anxiety and depression for a long time, and that's here and that's real. And that's something that we have to be very mindful of and really tend to ourselves and get the support that we need. And I think there's also something to your question about the the restrictions that are traditionally presented to us for Shabbat, knowing that we all enter this a little bit differently, but thinking about, the invitation to refrain from technology use in unhelpful ways, right? I'm thinking about, like
Mm-hmm.
I do not use social media. Like one of the many things I don't do on Shabbat is I don't use any kind of social media. And, that's part and parcel of my Shabbat practice because it's connected to other things that I don't use. But that in and of itself is that like that refraining creates a lot more spaciousness to be with what is where I am with whoever I am with. And
Mm-hmm.
that could be with myself. I love Shabbatot that I take in solitude. I've been doing that a lot recently, honestly. There's a certain sense that quality of time alone to read a good book or just do some practice. I think that's really helpful and it allows, I think, for just, it's kind of like in the week workday world, and especially these days, we are exposed to so many other people's internal monologues that we were never exposed to before the advent of social media, you know?
Mhm.
And sometimes I notice myself, like, I notice when I'm on social media, my the quality of my brain, like I feel like the quality of
Mhm.
mind changes. Like truly, I feel a difference in my mind of like, wow, I am like moving into this very dysregulated, very like narrow place. And
Mhm.
when I'm able to emerge from that, which is again like going back to the Shabbat restrictions, and I think this is coming immediately to mind because it feels so important these days. I just notice like the depth and quality of my mind changes. It's like,
Mhm. Mhm.
oh, here I am. Oh, like, I had an experience recently where I'd had an interaction with someone over email. Of course, it's the best way to have an interaction, right? Had an interaction with somebody, didn't go super well. I felt really bad about it. I did tshuva and did repair. And I
Mhm.
knew that I was going to be meeting this person in person. And I was really worried about it. Imagine that
Mhm.
nobody else here can relate to this experience. I was really worried about it. It's like, what's this going to be? I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know how we're going to navigate. I met this person, and my experience of them totally shifted. I was like, oh, I really like you. Oh, I really like spending time with you. Oh, I'm not caught in that story. So I think that a lot of the restrictions of Shabbat actually help us get out of story and help us anchor
Mhm.
in the here and now and anchor in the feelings that are arising here and now.
Yeah. Thanks
Sorry,
for
that was a bit
that.
of a meandering answer.
No, no, no. That's a great answer. That's a great answer, and I appreciate your vulnerability and being personal about it. Lauren, I want to just share. I'm going to read some of the chat, what's in the chat because it's first of all it helps some of this stay alive. So
Yeah.
Rabbi Lauren, thanks for this intimation to experience the joy that's all around me and for leading me to go even deeper into those experiences and moments. I found myself smiling throughout. Nancy read, I think the memory was even more delightful than the experience. So that was also interesting for people to explore something from
Mm,
the past and something now to really be with it in the moment, taking the time to marinate in it. And Susan wrote that your voice and smile brought her joy. Patricia wrote that grief and joy, and this is goes, I guess, to my question, that grief and joy are reciprocal and open the door to each other. Um, in terms
mm,
of moving from this season of grieving in the 3 weeks that ended on Tisha B'Av into and towards, and of course, this is going to be a very complicated year, needless to
mm,
say, for
mhm,
this chip, what is traditionally Zman Simchatenu, the season of our joy because of October 7th. But
mhm,
they open the
mhm,
door to each other, and mere remembering the precious moment helps me feel God's love. Um, and there's more. So um, the other thing I wanted to bring up in terms of the connection with Shabbat, just as a practice, as a Jewish spiritual practice, let's lift this up, right? That Shabbat, as you're describing it in a way, is particularly a time that we are set aside for turning away from the negativity and allowing ourselves to, as I forget who said, marinate, marinate in pleasure and joy, right? And seek out that which brings pleasure and joy. But that, as you said, we also are meant to infuse the rest of the week with that Shabbat awareness. So that means being on the constant lookout and noticing in real time as they come up moments when, oh, this is pleasurable. You know, this is bringing me joy, right? Whether it's a memory or an actual experience, like my morning coffee.
mm,
Oh, I take this for granted, but actually it brings me a lot of joy.
mhm.
Something the mundane things. So what about for you? What do you think about that in terms of that's a Shabbat practice to notice things that give us oneg or tanug?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Oneg and Tanuk, like joy. Yeah, I'm even thinking about just related to what you said about you know, the morning coffee, right? Whatever that, whether it's coffee or whatever one drinks in the morning, like that is a mindfulness practice, and the feel of, maybe you have a favorite lotion, right? Like that's something that
Mm-hmm.
I find a lot of joy in. Maybe you honestly, like maybe you have a particular fragrance. I particularly love essential oils, and I try to be very mindful of how I use them around other people, just and around myself, because you have to be careful to not overdo it, because there is a certain sense, like as with any kind of spiritual practice, right? If you overdo the use of you know, the vehicle for joy, sometimes it actually creates more of it's like an overwhelming. Um, I joke that there was like a particular aromatherapy product that I came across, and it was like, be gentle, don't use this too hard. It will have a bad impact,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's a really good practice point, because to your point around like bringing this into the week, I mean, I am really excellent, unfortunately, at finding all of the things that bring me a lot of sadness and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
despair. Like I'm really good at that. I think a lot of us are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that for me, and my invitation to all of us is to really take that, that ability to find the things and to turn it around and say, no, actually, I'm going to take that quality of mind and actually use it to find things that bring me delight and pleasure. And really allow that part of our mind to strengthen, and so that we can
Yep.
find a balance. And that's, I
Mm-hmm.
think, exactly what you're pointing to around Shabbat, like bringing this into the week. Finding that sense on a, Monday afternoon when you've just started the work week and you're like, ugh, I wish it was Shabbat. Like, can do for a minute or two to give myself a little bit of joy, or for me, like drinking a glass of lavender chamomile tea. Love that, right? Whatever it is for you, or maybe it's some kind of delicious treat or a song. Maybe you can take a minute to go outside and take a walk, or be with a beloved pet, or call a friend, or text a friend, or whatever it is.
I'm going
Read
to
a
just
book.
stick with coffee. I'm going to stick with
You're gonna
coffee.
stick with coffee. I'll stick with tea.
Lauren, this will end with this. And I don't know if you were on yesterday. Marcelo Bronstein just did a very beautiful practice, which really was about increasing the space between stimulus and reaction to be able to notice and be more aware of the flow of thoughts and narratives in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
And Susan connected it with your teaching to, oh, now I lost get back to it. Oh, yeah. Um, Susan was making the connection between yesterday's teaching with Rabbi Marcelo about noticing our narratives when they arise, but not attaching to them, choosing to turn instead in the moment towards joy. So I just want to lift up how Susan connected, our practice yesterday with this about exactly as you're describing, noticing those, patterns of negative thoughts of, oh, how can I, for example, it might be like, oh, this is beautiful and wonderful, but how can I enjoy this when there's so much suffering, or when I
Mm-hmm.
know it's gonna, it'll be over in a minute anyway. So
Right, exactly.
don't enjoy it too much. Poo poo
It's
poo, kind
ephemeral.
of
It's gonna
hurry.
rise and pass away. So
Right.
don't spend any time with it.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about culturally, conditioned, that's also, informed a lot by intergenerational epigenetic Jewish trauma, I think, as well.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Don't get too attached to anything pleasurable because it could be snatched away at any moment. In any case, I just wanted to lift that up to thank you, towards thanking you for increasing our awareness of that and inviting
Mhm.
us and encouraging us, especially in proximity to Shabbat, to release those narratives, give ourselves permission to release those narratives, right? And
Mhm.
instead really let ourselves savor, at least even for a few moments, the large and small pleasures that are available. And needless to say, you know, a definite motif of this week has been turning towards joy. So you're right in sync with the cultural gestalt these days.
Yeah, and thank you for lifting that up. And I just want to, if it's okay to say one
Yeah,
comment on
yeah,
that, you
sure.
know, it is so important to release ourselves from those narratives. And, it's really hard because a lot of times those narratives have a kernel of truth. They come out of our experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
something that I have found over and over again in my own experience is that that experience gets made so much worse by the layers upon layers upon layers of punishing narrative that I put onto it.
Yeah.
And then that just rolls around like an old tape in my head that I know so well I could hear it in my sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what if I just release that a little bit? And especially for us as Jewish folks, right? Like that's so hard, especially now, especially this year,
Mm-hmm.
especially with this holiday season coming up. So we have to be really compassionate
Mm-hmm.
towards ourselves and each other. And I deeply believe that if we as a collective, all of us sitting here today and whoever's listening later on, like it's just one moment at a time, but it really makes a difference because we are in such a narrow time. But what would it mean for us if we began to release a little bit of that and find our way into new possibilities that maybe we didn't
Yeah.
have access to before?
Amen to that. Amen. And let's end with this beautiful refrain that Susan just coined for Shabbat. No oys, only joys. So thank
Amen.
you, Lauren. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Natalie Rushinoff, for holding our tech space. Natalie's been away for a while, so glad to have you back, Natalie. And thank you for holding us so beautifully today. Thanks to each of you. Wishing everyone pleasure and joy on this Shabbat. And we hope to see you back on Monday to practice with Allison Cohen. Be well, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.